At that time, I was the VP of Engineering at Critical Path. It was one of the darlings of the dot-com boom, and I had a team of about 40 engineers working for me. And in the course of a couple months, I was given two mysterious projects. The first project was to integrate our service, which was a hosted email service, with AOL. And it just seemed like utter nonsense. We were actually integrating with a subsidiary of AOL. So it was like a lot of late nights talking to a foreign team for an integration that just really didn't make any sense to me. And I kept asking the business development team, like, well, what is this actually going to get us? Like, why are we doing this crazy integration? Like, we're not going to use all the features. They're not going to have a great login. And I was super focused on the customer experience and why this was going to be great for these customers in our company. And I didn't come to know till quite a bit later that the goal of integrating this was to get AOL on our slides for the next funding round so that VCs would be impressed and go, whoa, you have AOL as a customer? Yeah. And so that was one mystery. The second mystery was I had to do a similarly mysterious integration with E-Trade. E-Trade is a trading platform. Like, why would you need email with your trading platform? That is ridiculous. Until I found out that E-Trade was one of the strategic investors in our next round of funding. So had I known those things, they would have been incredibly valuable. And what I recognized from my recent experience actually doing some investing is that the mechanics of how venture capital and investing works are somewhat mysterious, very seldom revealed by the leadership at a company, or at least not fully revealed, but incredibly impactful in the things that you're asked to do as an engineering leader. And so the impact of VC will trickle down to some of the projects that you'll be asked to do if you work at a venture-backed startup, and that's something that I totally didn't understand. The first chunk of my career was being a VPE at several different companies and a co-founder for 18 years. The next part of my career, which I'm still doing today, is as an executive coach. So for the last 13 years, I've worked with founders from these companies and many more, working on leadership effectiveness, and I've got this incredible window into what CEOs are worried about. And then I started learning even more about this earlier this year when I started a tiny seed stage investment fund with two friends. And so these three different experiences have kind of colored my understanding of how VC impacts engineering. And this is knowledge that I wanted to pass along in a way that would really help you, because it's not really spoken about. It actually feels now like there's kind of two layers of things going on at a venture-backed startup. The first layer is, the obvious, like building of a product and a service and selling it to customers and trying to amass users. But the second thing that's going on behind the scenes is your CEO is trying to raise money the whole time. And your CEO is going to get money in little chunks, right? First, they're going to get a friends and family round. They use that to build something initial, and they go on and raise more and more rounds of funding. But they're generally not talking about it, or at least they're not talking about the details of it. And so it's something that will impact you all the time as an engineer, but you might not hear about explicitly. So here's what we're going to talk about. I'll give you some understanding of venture capital and how it works and kind of what the levers are that drive a lot of decisions. And then we'll talk about two specific questions that I'd like you to think about for your particular company if it's venture-backed. And then we'll end with a warning. Let's see. Covered some of this. So VCs are actually entrepreneurs as well. They are raising a fund and getting other people to invest in their company and then figuring out how they'll invest in companies to make money. And there's a very specific business model that they use that I didn't really understand until I started doing it. Venture capital is a very risky asset class. And so if you're a wealthy family or if you're an institution, you're investing a whole bunch of your money in like bonds and stocks and things that are going to make a steady return over time. Venture capital is in the riskier side of that, and at worst it needs to return 12% year over year to actually be kind of investable by the people who do it. And so venture funds run generally over 10 years. So when a venture capitalist says to a potential investor, I'm going to return 12% of your money year over year and invested over 10 years, if you look at the math behind me, the 12% annual return to the power of 10, the fund length, means that they have to return about 3x of the money that was invested for people to consider them to be a successful fund. And by successful fund, I mean if you're a venture partner, you're going to have to go raise a new fund every, say 3 to 7 years, which means you'll have to go back to your old investors and say, hey, look at all the great things that we're doing. Don't you want to put money in our next fund? And so you've actually got to show great returns. The folks that are going to be investing in you are people like university endowments, pension funds, insurance companies, banks, family offices, which is kind of a code word for wealthy people. And so these people are fussy about making a good return. They want to know that they're investing their money with folks that are going to bring in lots of revenue. So if there's a $100 million fund, let's say I'm a VC, I go out and I raise $100 million, I get to deploy that over 10 years. That means for the first several years, I'm looking for different companies, I'm investing in each company, I'm saving some back to even invest in them further. And that means that fund has to return at least $300 million in the course of the fund to be considered good. And you need to be considered good to raise more money from your LPs or limited partners, so all the universities, endowments, wealthy people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that's the very basics of how venture capital works. That means for every dollar as a venture capitalist that I invest, I need to return at least $3 to the folks that have invested it under my, I don't know, struggling for a word. Here are the likely outcomes that happen when you invest in startups. 50% of the things that you invest in as a venture capitalist will either be dead within 10 years or become zombies. And by dead, I mean the company actually closes its doors and doesn't function anymore and doesn't return anything. By a zombie, I mean a company that may actually continue to run successfully and serve customers, make money, employ people, but isn't actually ever going to return money to any of the investors. So the original investors aren't going to get money back, the founders aren't going to get money back, or at least their stock isn't going to be worth something. And that's 50% of the fund. So 50% of the fund, totally wiped out, investor gets zero. About 45% of the companies that venture capitalists invest in are acquired. So that means another company buys them. All the investors are returned some multiple of their money, and now guess what? You're now a part of this new company. And a very small percentage go public. Very small percentage are in that IPO category. So if you're working for a venture-backed startup, there's a really good chance that if you are able to have an exit, you will be acquired. And so given that 50% of the companies actually fail, the other 50% of the companies have to return that $300 million to make the VC successful and actually make the fund make sense. Another way to look at the VC fund returns is about 50% are in that blue bottom piece. Those are the companies that die or are zombies and return less than one time their value. 35% will have a kind of small exit. It's an exit that the investors will get their money back. Maybe the founders will make a little bit of money, but no one's knocking it out of the park. The orange wedge, some of them will have a higher value acquisition. And then that tiny little red pie wedge, 5% of the companies that they invest in are going to make 3x or more. And so what VCs are doing is pressuring all the CEOs in their particular portfolio to hurry and return my money because they're trying to push everyone into that red pie wedge. And a certain amount are just going to die and be taken off the table. Everyone else, they're hustling to get them to try and make more money so that the fund is successful. So a VC's basic job, in addition to this math, is they go out and raise money from those universities and high net worth individuals. They invest in companies. They push their CEOs to grow or exit. Sometimes they do that by being on their board. The board will be primarily made up of venture capitalists, although there will be some independents, maybe some other people. And they'll also just push them by influence. So even if they're not on their board, they'll be making phone calls. How are you doing? Are you going to do this more? Are you going to go faster? Because they need to pay their investors back at least 3x, and then they'll repeat the entire cycle. So they have incredible pressure to create returns within a short time frame because they want to demonstrate quality so they can raise other funds. Clear on the job of a VC? At least at a high level. So then let's go on to the CEO job. The 3 pieces of a CEO job are from a blog post by Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures, one of the top venture capitalists. And according to his blog post, there's really 3 things that a CEO does. And this comes up a lot in my coaching practice, so I actually agree with him. The first is to set the vision and strategy for the company and communicate it to all the key stakeholders. The second is to recruit, hire, and retain the very best talent. And then the third is to make sure there's always enough cash in the bank. And so making sure there's enough cash in the bank really means making sure that you can make your next fundraising round at least until you've got the escape velocity of you make enough money to sustain your company and grow in whatever way you need to. And so that red thing is what we're going to be kind of talking about throughout the rest of the talk. These are the typical investment stages. Each of them kind of has their own milestones that they need to adhere to. So for the angel or friends and family round, it's really you're funding a team and an idea. You don't have to show a lot of technology. And as a new engineering manager, it's unlikely you'll end up at a company like that. At the seed stage, you're really proving out that you've got some initial product market fit and you can make some money. At the A round, what you're showing is that if investors put more capital in the company is going to grow even more quickly. And so the investors want to see, boy, if we just dump some money into this, it's going to go like crazy. For the B round, they want to see that you're going to move into another vertical or another area and basically increase your entire market size. So all these are things that your CEO needs to be paying attention to behind the scenes so that she or he can go out and raise capital when you next need to grow. And then finally, you'd move on to potentially IPO or acquisition. But your CEO should always be working towards your next funding milestone if you're a venture-backed startup. That means CEOs are under crazy pressure to grow. They'll be under pressure from their board to grow by 3 or 4 times a year because, again, the majority of companies won't return any money, so the rest have to grow even faster. They'll be under pressure to accumulate marquee customers so they can put on their board deck like, whoa, look, we landed AOL, isn't that cool? They'll be pushed to partner with other companies that their current VCs have backed. So the VC will say like, hey, so-and-so's in our portfolio. Don't you think you could integrate with their thing and then you guys could both get more users? And the CEO doesn't really want to say the board is making me, and that's not really true. What the CEO would be saying is, we really need to raise the next funding round, and we want to get all the existing investors on the board to say, hell yes, you're doing great, we'll throw more money in, and we want to get even more investors to get excited about it and jump on the bandwagon and fund our next round of growth. So a great question to ask yourself as a new leader in engineering is like, what's required for a company's next fundraise? Because your job, the entire engineering team's job, is to build the things that will get your company to your next funding round. And those are usually features that will capture revenue, attract or retain customers, but it also means doing things like ignoring technical debt unless it creates significant churn. So here's some questions that you might be asking if you're at a venture-backed startup. Why is my CEO asking for more and faster revenue and more users? Well, your CEO is not just an asshole. They're trying to raise the next round of funding so that there are no layoffs, you don't have to shut your doors, and so you can actually grow your revenue, your customer base, and your product. Why is my CEO asking me to ignore technical debt and hack together features like crazy? This is making me nuts. Your CEO is doing that because they need to prove that those new features can be built, attract more customers onto your platform, and again, prove that your product has traction. You might be in a features race with another company. She or he could have promised investors that they'd reach certain milestones or land certain partnerships by the next funding round. So again, they're getting squeezed in this way that's not necessarily apparent when you're the engineering manager going, why are we doing this stupid integration? Another question you might ask is, why is my CEO asking me to cut costs while building more features? That's not possible. And it's so that they can show increasing margins. They want to show that the cost of acquiring customers is going down, while the lifetime value of a customer is going up, and the overall costs of the company are going down. Another one that I find humorous, like, why is my CEO asking me to make it social? Venture capitalists are subject to trends just like anyone else, and so being able to go out into the fundraising community and go, ooh, look at our new social angle on our product, might mean you attract a VC that's really making a lot of investments in social media and that otherwise would overlook your company. So following current trends sometimes makes a company more interesting. And finally, why am I spending cycles on an integration with this super lame partner? I explained a little bit about this earlier, but a lot of times you'll be asked to do integrations where there's like $0 in revenue, there might be very few users, but what your CEO and your executive team is working towards is getting logos on slides, getting help with fundraising, and also attracting some potential strategic investors. And those strategic investors can become potential acquirers. And if you remember back a few slides, we said 45% of companies exit through acquisition. That's not a bad thing to work on. A great question to ask and answer is, how do I explain all this to my team? One of the best ways to do that is actually to understand how venture capital works. So being able to understand we're heading towards this next round of fundraising, we have to show these compelling features, partnerships, et cetera, is really going to make a big difference. And the only way that I've been able to effectively explain this to my teams is to talk to them about the fact that we're not building software as art, we're building software as a business, and our business has to make its next round of funding to continue. So this is kind of an unfortunate side effect. We're not working at a giant company that can take forever to build a thing. We're actually running a race where we're constantly trying to get to the next funding round, and you have to kind of play along with that race to actually be successful at a startup. So the next question you might ask is, how will your company exit? The investors want to make their money back. So again, they're pushing your CEO to like, go faster, grow, grow, grow. And they don't care if your company dies, if the alternative is it's going to return very little. So they're sitting behind your CEO going, go, 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 faster, faster. And that's what's driving your board and your executive team. If you look back at the different possible exits, they're trying to push you towards that acquisition or IPO. A great question that's code for some of these acquisitions is, does partner XYZ have strategic value? Strategic value is a kind of a code word for, is there a reason that we're partnering with this person other than revenue and users? And you can further ask a little bit more about like, okay, why would that be valuable? Sometimes you won't hear a complete answer. An incomplete answer could mean that someone's sandbagging you, but it also could mean that it's a potential acquirer or strategic partner that the person you're talking to is just not allowed to talk about. And as your company gets closer to a potential acquisition, it might be that multiple companies are looking at you. It might be that there's a single company that's looking at you. But understanding what those signs look like can be really valuable as an engineering leader. So diligence, when someone's looking to acquire your company, looks like this. It looks like a partner coming in and having lots of meetings with key staff members. It means senior staff members are out of office a lot. They might be traveling to the partner's office to talk. It means absurd requests for technical documentation that you've never in your life had to write for the company. They're like, who would use this? This doesn't make any sense. Like, nope, need full documentation on everything. Get cracking on that. Forget about the features for a minute. It often looks like a hiring freeze, and it looks like no decisions are getting made because the books are getting frozen while a potential acquirer looks at like, okay, what's your cost of acquiring customers? What's your run rate, et cetera, et cetera. So no decisions are getting made. This isn't a sure sign that there's an acquisition, but it's a good hint because the biggest clue for an acquisition is actually diligence. I want to end with a warning, though. This insider information is both powerful and dangerous. So it's great to understand how venture capital works. It's great to understand what your CEO or executive team, what pressure they might be under. But it is not necessarily something that you can say in town hall, like, hey, I saw someone from partner XYZ here. Are we getting acquired? And the reason is leaks about an acquisition can actually literally scuttle a deal. And so it's not the kind of thing that you can come out and say, even though that sounds ridiculous. But your senior executive team is actually under legal obligation not to leak a potential acquisition. So they won't be able to answer your questions with anything but a sort of like vague strategic partnership kind of thing. You can, however, ask subtle questions in private, and the kind of question you could ask is this something I should prioritize over my other work right now? And so if you can go to somebody who's in the know about whether this partnership is actually going to go anywhere or not, that's a great way to discern, is this a partnership I should put a lot of time and energy in? And further, you could ask the question, tell me the level at which this partnership is most important. Are we trying to just kind of like stamp the logo on our next slide deck or announce to the press that we're partnered with this person and kind of any integration is going to be fine? Or is this something that we're actually trying to use to make revenue? Is this something that we're actually going to do a much deeper integration with? So asking those specific questions about like what will make this partnership valuable will make you a more valuable engineering leader. So hopefully I've given you a taste of what it's like to be a venture capitalist, a CEO, and you understand a little bit more kind of the influences that they're under and what they might be asking you to do, and maybe you're less likely to argue with things that don't make sense at face value and ask some good questions. Really my goal was to give you the information to be able to allow you to create more business value and be valued more by your team so that your company can be wildly successful. That's what I got.